my first introduction will be on resolution drafting and working on texts. This is an interesting and often not understood process. And with me, I know Felix will be able to come in and comment on it. He is the author of these slides and also my cohort on this one. Just imagine, all of you guys, you're here at the UN, and we're going to deal with text. This is what we're doing. We expect maybe 10 to 15 resolutions to be ready for the UNEA 5 in February. They're now being developed, and the resolutions thematically reflect concerns of different countries. You got a UN conference, UNEA 5, let's say that is the one. We have 193 member states. There would be probably an average of 3 to 4 delegates on each of the delegations. Some delegations are quite large because they have both the resources and the money to do so. But at least we have an average of maybe 500-600 delegates. And then we have the different topics to be dealt with. As I said, 10 to 15 resolutions, each of them with many sub-themes. And we have the UN official languages that this is going to go through. We've got English as a working language, often is, but in the plenaries, as you know, there are simultaneous translation. So we work in English, French, Spanish, Chinese, and Arabic. And we need to understand each other, and we need to make sure that the sentences and the concepts and the ideas and the questions and the statements reflect the same thing. Now, when you build a text, it's not like everybody goes in there and saying, I'd like to have this text adopted, and then everybody claps or not. There is a long process. And with UNEA 5, as we talked about yesterday, it begins with preparatory meetings a week prior to the hard negotiations that starts on the UNEA 5. The Bureau is meeting to review the texts, and the CPR, the Committee of Permanent Representatives in Nairobi, are also meeting to look at the text. And then the different regions of the UN system, the G77, the WEOG, these constellations, they also meet to see what they think about the text, the resolutions, and the statements. So in order to be able to coordinate this, there is a system in the text development. And for each delegation and each subtopic and each group work, to be able to follow this, there is a very intricate but fascinating system developed. And a text usually follows a structure, and we'll get into that. But you will see in the original texts that are being worked on a number of references. We have two here, the PP and the OP. Now, the PP stands for a preambular paragraph. A preambular paragraph means it is introducing the text, often in very strong and sometimes in very fluid and beautiful language. It's always, and it's written in a particular way. It's always present participle, third person, ends with a comma. And they're related, PP1, PP2, etc., are in the drafts. When you have the final document that we all see and we read when we go to the UN archives, these are not there, because the final text, you have the language itself, and these technical elements are not added, of course. You also have, in the preambular paragraph, references to previous resolutions on the same issue. And these previous resolutions are often important to bear in mind, because it actually tells the reader and tells the countries what they already have agreed to. So it provides a background to the resolution we're dealing with. Then we go into the OPs, which stands for Operative Paragraph. It's written also in a particular way. It's structured because you need this for grammar in all the languages. It's in present singular, it's end with semicolon. And you have Operative Paragraph 1, 2, 3, etc. And of course, again, in the final text, these references are dropped. these texts could address different actors. It could be member states, it could be the UN, a UN agency, or references to paragraphs. And I just remembered one of the languages, and I do apologize. Of course, Russian is also one of the official UN languages. And the paragraph starts with a verb. Felix, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, just a small little addition. That was well put, Jan Gustav. As Jan Gustav said, when it moves to a point of proper negotiations, these are dropped. But also what will happen is where the text is built on previous text that's already been agreed. So it might be that FAO has agreed a particular paragraph that's in there. They will, at this stage, footnote that, say what the paragraph is and a link to that paragraph, so that member states can see that not only is it saying that it's, recognizing a particular thing that was agreed somewhere else, but they can already read that to be sure in the negotiations that it's word for word what it is. If it's not an agreed language thing, that, for example, like it's something out of the GEO report, which is not an agreed document, it's a document that UNEP produces internally, then they'll reference it, but they'll reference the GEO quote. If it's from outside the UN, of course, it's less, I guess, accepted. But it's still, if it's a strong recommendation, it might be something from Eurostats or something, which is not a UN body. And so those will also be very important. And then, of course, the paragraphs you add are the ones which is where you're trying to move the process forward. And often any reference to those paragraphs will be from text that hasn't gone through the UN system before.
And you just remember another thing that you need to keep in mind. When the negotiation starts, you have an original text which is produced by the Bureau and the CPR and the Secretariat in the case of UNEP. You start on day one, and quickly you see that they will break down in a number of groups. So you may, under one resolution, perhaps have 2 to 3 or 4 different groups working on this. So that is why this structure and this, let's call it the language choreography and the system works. And it works in a very, very efficient way to get all these ideas into a final document, which hopefully will be then agreed to at the end of the UNEA session or any of the UN conferences.
Just one small thing here. One of the advantages of stakeholders operating on the same system, and we don't, very few, is that you're able to cross-fertilize text from other decision-making forums, whether it's FAO or WHO or the high-level political forum ministerial declaration. And the advantage of that is that the civil servants negotiating at UNEP may not know those texts. And so you are acting as helping them to understand that this is not a bad text to be adopted because their representatives at these other bodies have already accepted that text.
And unless these texts are negotiated in what is called a closed meeting, all of these texts, as they develop, are streamed on internet, so we have full access. And this also is accordance with the rules of procedure at many of the UN bodies today. So could you have the next slide, please? Thank you. Felix has found this quote from Suzette Hayden-Elgin, who's a language specialist, and she talks about, if you look at the right puzzle we put together, the necessary skills of a good translator. Suzette Hayden-Elgin puts the need to translate things into a fantastic, very necessary context. And let me read it out. Translation, is not a matter of substituting words in one language for words in another language. Translation is a matter of saying in one language for a particular situation what a native speaker of the other language would say in the same situation. The more unlikely that situation is, in one of the languages, the harder it is to find a corresponding utterance in the other. And just look at the puzzle we put there. Language knowledge, sound process, cultural awareness, curiosity, research skills, IT skills, attention to detail, dependability, adaptability, and integrity, professional pride, sound translation judgment, organization and motivation, excellent writing skills, and of course, a substantive understanding of the issues we're dealing with. So putting all this together into 6 different languages is not easy. And both Felix and I and Lyda have run across issues that may mean one thing with one context in English and suddenly have a slightly different issue in another of the languages. For instance, when we refer to the 5 Ps of the 2030 Agenda, peace, prosperity, partnership, the planet, and people, mind you that the 5 Ps only relates to the English version of the 2030 Agenda, because in the other languages you have the same translations, but they're not all in beginning with a P. So, be mindful of that. And also these nuances when we talk about issues. Felix, I know you have a few interesting examples to illustrate this.
Well, I think that I came across this issue back when I wrote the book with Michael Strauss called How to Lobby at Intergovernmental Meetings, Minds a Cafe Latte. We went and spoke to some of the translators and asked them how they were translating, and they were trying to do exactly what Suzette was suggesting isn't the way of doing it, which is just replacing a word with another word, because these things are culturally specific. And the example that they used to us, which I thought was interesting, was that in kind of America or the UK, if you sign up to targets, there is a more legalistic viewpoint of that, while in French it's more aspirational. And so if you don't understand how the negotiators are understanding those terms, then you're not understanding potentially the disagreement between them, or even when they get agreement, what they think they're going to do with something afterwards. So it's, again, a really interesting space. And I've always wanted to get a master's student in linguistics to help me kind of do a nice little project of taking those terms that we use and trying to get language boxes on what that means for Spanish speakers, what does it mean for Russian speakers, what does it mean for English speakers, etc. Because I think we're missing some of the understanding of the disagreements, and I think to help negotiators, it would be interesting to do something like that.
And when you run into these language conundrums, you may sit and listen to one nation presenting on an issue that is very dear and important to you, and you hear that there may be nuances that are not really corresponding to what you would like to say. This is when to approach perhaps that person who made the statement, but not when he is in the seat and talking, or she's in the seat and talking, but when they go outside to have a coffee. It's often misunderstood that these coffee breaks and the coffee trips or tea trips, for that matter, that delegates often use, that they go out there to have a smoke or do nothing. Now, this is when they sit and think about the language issues and see if they have gotten everything right and they can agree on these things. And that's a fine opportunity to go up and said, sir, or madam, I was listening to you. Do you mean, etc., in a polite way?
Leisha's put a point which I hadn't realized, which is in the chat box. She says some languages, e.g., have no word for gender. For instance. And so therefore, if you're discussing that, what is their understanding of that term as it's being applied?
And there's another interesting thing, but we can't go into that because this is me as a language person fascinated by the fact that a number of concepts have actually come up through the UN system, been now adopted as the going jargon of today. And if you're a language person, look at the development of these concepts over time, beginning back in the 1940s. Next slide, please. we, or actually Felix is the mastermind behind this, sort of overview of how a resolution may look. And behind these technical words that we often read quickly and don't really pay attention to, there is a political meaning. I think this is a very, very good way of looking at this, slightly tongue-in-cheek, because we may have sort of put into a provocative interpretation, but it really makes you understand how to read and see the political context and even the cultural context and the thematic context of a resolution. So when you read these papers that come out of these issues, you still have to look at the intent behind it. Vertically, as you see, there are 4 boxes. There is a sort of a level of commitment to this. You have the first one, let's say, affirming we're into the preambular text, and we say that the text says, well, we're not quite serious about this, and then depends. Is it just a term and no action defined in it? Does it say who should do it? Does it have a timeline? Or does it have a monitoring mechanism? When you read through an outcome resolution, look for these things. And there are many examples of statements that have very little of content, and there are many, many texts that actually have, you can tick the boxes for all of them. One example that springs to my mind, which I know quite well because I was part of the negotiation of this, is the so-called resolution 67-90. 67-90 is UN speak for the resolution that gave the mandate and the sort of working and marching order for the high-level political forum, which is the coordinating body for the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, and which is in operation in New York. In the introductory part of that, it has actually statements referring to the outcome documents in Rio in 2012 and several other documents. And I would say they're quite serious about this. And it has a number of action references. Does it say who should do it? Yes, it does, but it emphasizes 2 things. One, every country should do it, i.e. the universal membership, but it's on a voluntary basis. This is emphasized. And this is, of course, the issue that the UN is always struggling with. How decisive can the UN decision be, and at the same time respecting the sovereignty of the nation? Does it have a timeline? Well, the 2030 agenda does have a timeline, and that is 2030. And we are referring to the 2030 timeline so often that we think it's just one way of framing a country, but it actually says action should be fulfilled by that time. And we will also see that under the present theme for UNEA 5, strengthening action for nature to achieve the SDGs, it is the same timeline. So that is sort of an overarching issue. Does it have a monitoring mechanism? Yes, 67-90 and HLPF is very specific on that because it talks about the monitoring and the evaluation even of what the countries are doing. And this has been instrumentalized in the HLPF case in the VNRs, the voluntary national reviews or reports. So this is a very interesting example of almost an ideal set. The question is, of course, do the countries fulfill that? And maybe Felix, you could take us through some of these very interesting levels of understanding the content of these documents.
I think in most cases you've dealt with it. As you can see, the definition was humorous. Again, it's from the book I did in 2004 on how to lobby. And it was really just to give people an idea of when they're looking at a paragraph, whether it's a serious one. And of course, it's not as serious if it's just a statement by itself. And as Jan Gustav says, as you start to go through the strengthening of that paragraph, Of course, if it's a date which is way ahead in the future, then of course that's also something to raise red flags. So if they're asking you to do something by 2050, well, they're not going to be around to be able to be held accountable to that. So, you know, I tried to put in a sense, the way of looking at building the paragraph up on those vertical lines to give you an idea, if you were producing a paragraph, what you will be looking to have in it. Now, not all paragraphs have to have those clearly, but ones where you want action to be taken, that's really important.
As you all know, we're addressing you from home, and there are certain idiosyncrasies being at home and trying to work. Someone just rang the doorbell, and I am expecting a delivery this afternoon. So Felix, could you take the next one, and I'll just block my video for a second, please.
Sure, off you go. So we just wanted to give you a couple of examples here. So this is taken from an existing resolution. So you get an idea what a Preambular paragraph would look like. And in both cases, the PP and the OP are dropped. But in the PP, it exists without a number in front of it. When you move to the resolution as a whole, OPs will just drop the OP, and then it'll continue with the numbering that they have. But as I say, it gives you an idea, reaffirming existing documents. That's the kind of thing you do in the beginning of the document. When you get to OP, in the case of this, they're taking note of a UN Secretary General report, because it's not a negotiated report, but it means that they can use some of the recommendations in that if they want to in the next iteration of that. It would be better if it's more than takes note. It will be taking action. That will be a stronger process. Could you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is in case you wanted to have a go. So the next two slides are basically ones without OP or PP to them. If you want to have a go at doing that and send it to us, we can tell you what the answers to that were and whether you got that. The third one, which is what Charles has just put up, is the kind of thing that we would produce. And so until I started to do kind of resolution work, which is actually pretty recently, it's the last 3 years, I just got a resolution through the General Assembly on sustainable investment. I hadn't really appreciated what the governments were doing. I would give them some text, as we always do, and just hope that they will put it in. But if you are working early enough in the process, as the resolutions come out and they're circulated and they become live text, then they haven't got the OP or the PP with it. But as they're developing, if you're telling, if I'd converted this into something where I told them these were Preambular paragraphs and operational paragraphs, it would have been much easier for them to take it into what they were preparing as a resolution. So think about that. If you're early in the situation, before the text becomes active, that means a number of governments are working on it, and it's not too difficult, at least at the General Assembly level, to work out a whole lot of resolutions, because they're annual resolutions, and so you can look at the previous ones and basically build on previous resolutions, because a lot of the text will remain the same. And when it's a difficult time period, and we're in a difficult time period now, often it will seem that that all we're doing is repeating text, and that is true. And the reason for that is just to stabilize before we can make a move forward again, and not to get pushback. One of the reasons why the high-level political forum text has moved over to next year is because the US doesn't want to sign up to climate change commitments that have been made in previous texts, and the other governments are not prepared to water it down. And so, you know, even restating stuff can be important to make sure that people don't lose stuff that's been agreed. And that's important because governments change. And as governments change, sometimes you need to re-educate the people who are the new civil servants or the new ministers.
Yes, I'm back again. Thank you for that, and apologies to all the participants. I just was reminded when we did this preparing what the former Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland said. Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was also the chair of the commission which carries her name, and also introduced back in 1987 the Sustainable Development Concept and put it on the international agenda. She said once, in having been asked about the UN work she was doing, she was also the Secretary General of WHO for many, many years. She said, in many cases, a decision which is taken in a in an intergovernmental context only lasts from one meeting to another. And if you're not alerted, as Felix said, to the text, some country or some person may suddenly go in and suggest it be deleted or watered down. And this is also one of the reasons why it's important to be vigilant about these texts and really, as we emphasized time and again yesterday, be well prepared and having read all these proposals. This is what the UN is all about, and then we'll talk about implementation a bit later when we set these words into practice. Next slide, please.
Okay, that brings us to our first question and answer period. Lyda, if you'd like to activate your microphone and camera so you can join in, you are very welcome to. At the moment, we have 2 questions. I would ask the participants, again, remind you that questions should go into the Q&A box rather than the chat box. So if you don't mind, start thinking about putting some more questions in. The first question is, I can see PP and OP in all the terms. How do I know which one means what? I mean, have you guys already and gals already answered that in your comments? It might be that Felix, you're muted.
We have in the presentation, so and I gave you some clues in the chart as well. Only that's why we gave the homework, so that you could, if you wanted, have a personal go at it and then send it to us, and then we're happy to comment on what you've done. So we were trying to give you an opportunity to do a trial run and in a sense send it back to us to have a look at. But if you follow what we have said in the definitions, if you look at where we've put OP and PP in certain terms, that should give you an indication.
If you look at some documents from the UN, which has an obvious division of the preambular part and the operational part, I think the 2030 agenda to transform society into a sustainable society is a good one. If you look at when you look at the document, the UN document, when it's decided, in the upper right-hand corner, there is a reference to the UN archives, and in the case of the 2030 agenda document, it says capital A / RES, resolution. Capital A refers to the General Assembly, and it says 70.1. And 70 refers to the 70th session of the United Nations General Assembly, and this is .1 means the first resolution. If there's an L there, it means it's not been completely resolved in terms of documentation. But if you read this version, you see it has a very clear introductory part, which is the preambular text, and this is where you find in English the 5 Ps. It's beautifully crafted English, written by the co-chair of the Open Working Group at the time, Ambassador Donahue, and it's worth reading for even the beauty of the language. And then you have throughout the 2030 document, you have they're all paragraphs, and it's clearly defined where the operative paragraphs are, and you can also see how they refer to the matrix that Felix made when referring to, repeating to, referring to recalling, etc., etc. You'll find it there. It's a very good sort of introductory document to these technical terms. But of course, as Felix said, and as we also say in our explanation, this is a final document. It's been agreed to, and so the OPs and the PPs are not there, of course.
Let's take another question, and it is, who is normally drafting the resolutions? Is it the member states
Yes.
that do the first draft, and then the major groups have access to it?
Well, I mean, so there are different ways to do it. So, for example, with the resolution on sustainable investment, I did the first draft, and then I found a government who would take it forward. So if you're being, and we talked about this yesterday, if you're trying to be ahead of the process, then you will do your work in getting something to a government. So I drafted it I sat on the President of the General Assembly's advisory group for a report on sustainable investment. Out of that report, it was welcomed by the incoming PGA, Peter Thompson, and then nothing was going to happen with the recommendations. So I took the recommendations, I produced it into a resolution, and I didn't use OP or PP at that time because I didn't realize that's what they were doing. And then I worked with Nigeria, in this case, to develop that resolution. And as we developed the resolution over a 3-year period, it evolved into a situation where we were using PP and OP and using footnotes to show, because this is a new area for the General Assembly to operate. So every single paragraph, as close as possible, had to be linked to existing text so we could get it in. It's now an annual resolution in the General Assembly, but it took 3 years to get that. These things don't happen overnight. Now, in the context of when resolutions are going into UNEA, a number of governments will have an idea of resolutions that they want to introduce. And as you know, the Bureau has set those 4 or 5 themes. I can't remember if it was 5 or 4 that we discussed yesterday, and they'll be asking for resolutions under each of those. And so if you know your government has an interest in that, then you would move forward. As the resolution becomes live, then the different political groupings will assign someone who will be the active focal point for that resolution. So G77, if there's a resolution on X, they'll have some. It won't be Palestine who are doing all of it. It'll be a specific country within G77 that's assigned that responsibility. And once you know that, then you can work to get additional text into the resolution.
Ida, would you like to comment at all on that?
No, I think my colleagues did everything very well.
Thank you. There's another question.
I think Jan Gustav.
Let me add a thing there, because what Felix raised a few very, very important points. The question was who develops the resolution, and so we can be part of the development, and I want to reiterate and very clearly remember what Felix said. It took 3 years. And yesterday we talked about consistency and participation over time. And if you want to be influential and if you want to be part of this process, you need to stay with it as long as your issue is there until it has a resolution. This is what we call, the non-state stakeholders cannot vote. That's absolute. It's an intergovernmental process we're part of. But we are invited to become an interested party and influential in agenda setting. We talked about that yesterday, and we gave you a number of interesting examples on how major groups have been instrumental in setting the agenda. We referred yesterday to the DPI conference that Felix chaired in Bonn, which was actually focusing on a number of the key issues that became the 17 SDGs. So civil society and non-state stakeholders and major groups were highly instrumental in setting the agenda. And then we were part of the process in what we call decision shaping and decision making. The final vote, when Felix said, when the decision, then the text becomes live, this is when the governments are dealing with it. And this is when you sort of, we have still a very important role, but when we have to be very delicate and very political about what we're doing. This is the sensitive part of the issue.
Thank you, Jan Gustav. Let's take one more question before we move on. I think we can easily answer this one. May I know if there is a university around the world established for and focuses its studies on the UN systems, including all these resolution formula to enable future generation of students to go through?
So UNITAR runs courses on for member states. I think I don't know whether they let stakeholders attend that. Harvard do as well, so that would be more open, I'm guessing. But you know, when you go in to the UN at the beginning of the year, usually, or well, actually, the beginning of the year for most governments is September, because it's a crossover period. So people leave in August and the new delegates come in September. You'll often find different rooms in the UN being used for training for the new delegates and helping them to understand all these things. So for governments, there's a system there. In the context of the broader stuff, the Stakeholder Forum has developed a summer course with UNDESA, which we'll be hopefully launching for next year, probably online for the first year, which will be I guess a 3 to 5 day course, hoping to develop more understanding of the SDGs, of the climate agreement, of the Addis Ababa agreement, and also more depth than we're doing perhaps here. So there are a number of courses at universities that you'll find click up, but often they're not being delivered by people who were active in the process. They're professors who are reading other people's work. The difference here is you have 3 people who have been active in the process and understand exactly what happens in the corridors, know the government people, and have been active in getting decisions taken. And we felt that that's why we partnered with UNDESA. We felt that was a missing component on what is on offer at the moment.
And may I add also, that's why we're doing what we're doing right now with collaborating with the civil society unit at UNEP. I just also know that our friend and colleague Raymond Sanner in Geneva has run what he calls diplomatic training courses on this issue. Yeah. But as you said, this is diplomatic courses, but I think they're also open to master and postgraduate students. At least some of the years have had that. So there are a few opportunities available.
There is also the United Nations University, which I think is based in Japan. And I'll put a link in the chat box. And they link with universities all around the world. And I think that when Felix was making reference to Harvard and other universities, I think that's where all the linkages are made. I would please suggest to our speakers that we move on to the next session. I'm going to share the screen again, and I believe this next section is Felix. So
it is.
Felix, you are welcome to take the floor, and if you're ready to begin that.
Yeah, thanks. Lisha also mentioned the IHE water diplomacy. So you'll find a number of courses that have specific focus on different SDGs as well, where they do that. In fact, there was also a section as part of the Stockholm Water Week this year, I think, on diplomacy. I wasn't that impressed. I went to it, but you know, there are these attempts to do this. If you could move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so I mean, most of you probably will be doing some of this, but we wanted to just have something which people could share and which they could use. And remember, the objective of this is that where possible, you'll take the material we produce and you'll run this as an internal conversation for your own colleagues in your organization who haven't been able to be part of this, or with other sister or organizations that you work with either in your country or abroad. So see this as something that you can change as you see fit. Now, if you're organizing a press release, we still do those, then you know, use action verbs, be direct, be comprehensive. The first paragraph is the most important. If you don't catch the media person's eyes at that particular point, then that's not going to get much further. And we were very fortunate in the run-up to Rio +20 to borrow the BBC Environment correspondent, and he opened up at a training his inbox so we could see what was in the inbox. So clearly, whatever the subject of the email that you're sending on the press release is absolutely crucial. He's not going to read it if it's not relevant. He also said something really important, which is that don't overwhelm the media with lots and lots of press releases, because they won't see it as important. If they know the organization's key organization is only sending them a number of press releases when it's very important, then they will open them. So I thought that was very good advice. So the 5 Ps: who's involved in the news story, which person or company or a stakeholder is engaged, or company you're attacking, or whatever. What's happening? What's it about? When did the story or event, or when is it going to happen? Where is it going to happen? And why is this important? So those 5, you basically would develop a set of sentences around. If you could take the next slide, please. So you can't read this well, I think, on the screen. So again, you'll be able to look at it, but the top of the pyramid is what we were talking about. The middle bit of the pyramid is, in a sense, the information, the additional facts or details, the scientific backup that you're doing that shows that it's important, whatever the arguments or controversy is. And the bottom bit is, in a sense, the information that you are doing. In a sense, those would be the footnotes, they'll be your contact details, they would be that kind of information. If you take the next slide. So if you're in New York or you're in Geneva, there's a thing called the United Nations Correspondents Association, and that's all the correspondents that are accredited to the UN and actually active. I think mostly live in New York or Geneva or around there. Their details are available online, and you can get their name, their telephone number, and their email. And so if you type in United Nations Correspondents Association New York, you'll find the details of who's there. You can look for the journalist who is from your country. And so even if you're not in New York and you want an issue raised, you can contact them if you're going to go to New York. For Nairobi, it's different. For Nairobi, there's an African network for environmental journalists. There's a Foreign Correspondents Association for East Africa, and East Africa is a hub of UN activity. The journalists that would be active at the UN are probably going to be part of that. And UNEP does produce a guide for environmental reporting for African journalists. So if you go onto the site, the UN site, UNEP site, you can find the link to the guidelines on how journalists can work. So if you want contact details, those are there. For larger organizations, and I realize this is a problem for non-large organizations, and that's why sometimes it's best to be in at least a loose coalition which would have the funds to do that. You can buy country lists. So there are a number of companies that exist where you can buy it, and what you do is you'll have a list of all the bloggers that are in the particular issues. You'll have the trade organizations, and you'll have the environmental journalists, the energy journalists, all the things that are kind of in the different divisions that you might want. We had that when we were at Stakeholder Forum, or when I was at Stakeholder Forum, because we had a contract to help deliver Rio +20 from the UN. So we had the ability to do that on a month-by-month basis. It's not a cheap thing, but it gets you the details that you need. So it is worth doing at some point if there's a big campaign that you're running in your country or globally. There are submission rules and deadlines for stories, which often will be on the thing. Will be part of what you would do normally. So if you are going to have a press conference on the Wednesday, you might pre-release something with a do not use before Wednesday date. When you're mapping out these things, you need to map out what publication. So when I'm doing an event, that I'm involved in. I've just been doing one for the Working Animals Alliance. They have an event next week on the 22nd on working animals and disasters and Climate Week. So what we've done is we've looked through all the blog areas that we might be able to engage in. We've looked at the trade magazines that might be of interest to what we're doing. We've also looked at the different list servers and the LinkedIn groups that might be interested in the event that we're organizing. And then we've put that information out. In the context of things like radio and TV or news rooms, it's not just the journalists that over time you need to build a relationship with. It's also the producers and the editors of the program. And so just like lobbying, media is no different. It's the building of a relationship with the journalists so that they come to you. And so Stakeholder Forum had a reputation, particularly during the climate negotiations from 2008 to 2012, that we knew what was going on. And we had a very interesting group of team. We had someone who was on the on the South African government delegation, so we had an idea of what was going on in G77. We had someone who was on the European Union delegation, so we had a really good thing. So during Copenhagen, at least the British media basically hung out with us in the main conference center because they knew we would find out probably quicker than they would what was going on in the negotiations. So building those personal relationships is really important. Many people have moved from Skype, they've moved on to WhatsApp as the way of communicating, but don't overuse WhatsApp because you'll find that eventually that you'll get blocked by the person who you're trying to get. So again, it's like the press release. If you want to talk to a journalist, have their telephone number, use the WhatsApp at the appropriate time, but be very careful not to overuse that. If you do the next slide, please. So traditional media still is important. It still feeds television, it feeds the narrative of what's going on. And so, you know, clearly if you're in your country and you're doing something in a locality, what is the local media? What's the national media? If it's an international process, are there international media outlets there? Is there Reuters? Is there AP? Is there IPS? What international news outlets can you get interested in your story? Sector publications. So we have a thing in the UK called Whose Line Is It Anyway? And I think it's Whose Line Is It Anyway? And they used to have these things where they'd have obscure publications at the end and you had to decide what the headline was going to be or something. And I thought, what a great idea. Why don't I start to write for obscure publications? And so we had in 1999 the issue of oceans and fisheries at the Commission on Sustainable Development. So I engaged with the Fish Friers Review, which is the magazine for the British fish and chip shops. And we actually had an article in that about sustainable fisheries. And in fact, the issue after that, we had the chair of the session reading Fish Friers Review at the UN, and that was their front cover. And so though it's a silly thing, it got to a whole lot of small and medium-sized businesses about the issue of how sustainable fisheries is an important thing, and it is an issue that they took up. So those core sector publications are also important. Political magazines are very important. You'll have your own in your own country. So for the UK, it tends to be the New Statesman. For the US, something like the Atlantic. If you can get something in there, then it has a wide readership. I had something picked up. I'd done an article for Interpress Service, which is the southern developing countries version of Reuters and AP. If you don't know IPS, it's a great place to get news, great place to get articles placed as well. I'd written an article with Michael Strauss on postponing the UNFCCC in Glasgow from this year to next year. And it actually got picked up by Politico. And so you can have this kind of thing where you get something in one publication, and if it's the right publication, it'll get picked up by others. And then if it's in something like Politico, it's pretty much in every politician's in tray on what's happening. So that's really important. On broadcasting, so there were two things that we did on radio, which were really important in Stakeholder Forum. The first was that during the chairship of the Commission on Sustainable Development by the Dutch minister, we had a grant from the Dutch ministry to produce radio programs, and we worked with UN Radio. We also worked with BBC Foundation